Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents American Warrior, The True Story of a Legendary Ranger, by Gary O'Neal with David Fisher. Narrated by David Vries. Forward. After reading this chronicle of escapades, and having known Gary O'Neal and his legend for quite some time now, I can honestly say that perhaps one of the hardest things in life to be is Gary O'Neal, only to be superseded by being his friend, or in most cases his commander. To some people he is a myth, like the illustrious Corporal Steiner in the Willy Heinrich novel about German soldiers on the Eastern Front in World War II, The Cross of Iron. He's that wild man who always seems to survive, often with physical injuries and always with a slightly greater irreverence for command. To others, he is the person they hear, fear, and tell tales about, yet they don't really know him, or do they really want to? Now consider this. Of the citizens of the United States, only 1% voluntarily joins the armed forces for whatever reason. Of that number, only 1% joins the ranks of the Special Operations community. The top 1% of that group makes it in the ranks of the super soldiers in the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. Then there are the individuals like Gary O'Neal. As far as history, O'Neal is the first former member of the Army Golden Knights parachute team to gain entry into the Ranger Hall of Fame. Then again, he's been a first for many things, so don't even get me started. All kidding aside, O'Neal is one fine piece of work. He's an inspiration to many, and he just won't quit, although I hear that he's been slowing down some lately. He could be the biblical Casca of this generation, doomed by Jesus to wander the earth aimlessly, always as a soldier, until the second coming, but for certain he is the quintessential American warrior. Airborne, Ranger, Special Forces, bloodied in combat at the age of 15, with a bloodline that begins with the Lakota Sioux Indian tribe, and a heraldry that includes the lodge poles of Black Elk, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull. Since Maryland was settled in the colonial times of the 1700s, a member of the O'Neal clan has taken up arms and fought for this country in every conflict, almost timely, like rites of passage. The O'Neal clan merged with the Lakota Sioux when Gary's father returned well decorated from World War II and married into the South Dakota tribe. That made O'Neal a mixed blood to the elders of the tribe. These same elders removed that stigma and welcomed him as a warrior after he proved his spirit in the performance of the Sundance. To really know O'Neal is to recognize that the only thing he lacks in life is a formal education, and probably for the best. He certainly would have intimidated his officers and commanders even more if he would have quoted Shakespeare or any of the great philosophers in Latin or Greek while debriefing a combat operation or teaching a class on silent killing. One simple axiom has guided his life. If it sounds stupid but it works, then it isn't stupid, especially if it will get you out of a jam or save lives in combat. From his childhood to his teens, through his young adult and adult life, O'Neal has lived only one way, the hard way, in the face of danger, full speed ahead. He has always and forever pushed himself to the edge, pegging the torque on his pitch to the red line. A few times he's gone over the edge, but he has always made it back, not always in one piece. Above all, he has never failed to Charlie Mike, continue the mission, and never has he failed a comrade in battle. This book is his story. It is easy to hear, but don't you dare attempt any of his antics at home or in training, at least not without his supervision or his blessing. The era of combat he has survived spans 40 years and takes place on every continent in the known world. Many talk the talk, but only Gary O'Neal has walked the walk around the world. President John F. Kennedy, the father of the Green Berets, once said, "The time has come to pass the torch to a new generation." It is my hope that O'Neal's life, his story, and this book serves as a legacy and primer that motivates the next generation of Americans to ranger up and take on the enemies of this great nation. Anything, anytime, anywhere, O'Neal wouldn't want it any other way. Gary O'Neal's commitment to life, and for the rest of his life, is to do just that. Teach those who want to learn, talk to those who will listen, and for the few who dare, push them to their outer limits where who dares wins. He will guide them to follow in his footsteps sua sponte, so they can blaze their own trail, then, like all good rangers, lead the way. John K. Singlaub, Major General, U.S. Army, retired. Preface. Memorial Day 2010 at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. was a beautiful, sunny day. A nice young lady was standing at the front gate, and as each person entered, she handed them 2 roses. There was a big box right next to her, and she was reaching down and taking the roses out of that box, 2 at a time. When she handed me my 2 roses, I stopped there and I smiled and I said politely, "Excuse me, ma'am, but you'd better give me that whole box. I got a lot of friends here." Prologue. October 1978, Nicaragua. I had lost all comprehension of time. I could have been hanging up there in that barn for 2 days or 2 weeks. They had tied my hands behind my back, and then they lifted me up and slipped the rope over a hook. Then they dropped me down. Both my shoulders were yanked right out of their sockets, my shoulder blades pressed down on my lungs. It didn't matter. I was beyond the physical pain anyway. They asked me all kinds of questions about different people, but I didn't believe their intention was to get information. They wanted to torture me. This was punishment, nothing more. This was their vengeance for what Somoza's army had done to them. Their desire was to make me suffer. And they did. They took me to extremes. Sometimes people would come into the barn and beat up on me. They figured I was never leaving that barn, so they didn't take care to hide their faces. I saw them all. I knew what they looked like. I remembered. I went in and out of consciousness. I focused on the techniques I'd been teaching people about how to resist interrogation. Rather than trying to resist the pain, I accepted it, absorbed it, and controlled it. I knew that the most important thing I could do was keep the pain from cluttering my mind. If I allowed the pain to become so intense that I couldn't focus on anything else, I was done. With my shoulders collapsed, I couldn't breathe very well. I could only take short breaths. But I was still able to release some of the pain through my breathing. I could imagine it, encapsulate it, and project it out. They beat me regularly. If I didn't answer their questions, they would hit me, butt-stroke me with the back of their AKs, slap me, and smack my shins with boards. If I did mumble some kind of made-up answer, they still hit me. They were enjoying this, and they wanted to keep me alive as long as possible. When the pain got too intense, I forced myself to focus on positive images rather than dwelling on it. This was the one time all those breathing exercises I had been doing through the years really paid off. When I could, I let my spirit soar free and away, as I had been taught by the elders. I projected myself outside of my body, leaving that pain behind me. I tried to be somewhere else. I looked into the fire, just as I had done growing up on my grandfather's farm. The truth is, I was grateful when I lost consciousness. No matter how much training you have to prepare for that moment, there are some things that pain you so deeply that the human mind can't absorb it. The mind is merciful that way. There are things you see that are beyond understanding, so that you're never sure what's real and what's imagination. I never allow my mind to stay too long on the things that I saw happen in that barn. There are images that come and go. When I let my guard down, there are flashes of things that may or may not be real. I try to block it all out, but sometimes in the night, they still sneak through. My family was murdered in that barn. I woke up and there was my wife lying in a pool of blood. There were my kids lying in a pool of blood. They were being hit and kicked. My wife was being molested. My kids were screaming for me to help them. I lost consciousness. Before I did, I swore vengeance on all of them. Chapter 1. Although there was no legal compulsion to the performance of military duty, yet every man of full age and size was expected to do his full share of public service. If he did not do so, he was hated out as a coward. Even the want of any article of war equipments, such as ammunition, a sharp flint, a priming wire, a scalping knife, or tomahawk, was thought highly disgraceful. A man who, without a reasonable cause, failed to go on a scout or campaign, when it came to his turn, met with an expression of indignation in the countenances of his neighbors, and epithets of dishonor were fastened on him without mercy. The Great West, by Henry Howe, 1851. I have sat on the mountain-top and seen the eagle soar. I sat on that same small staked-out piece of land where Sitting Bull and Black Elk, Red Cloud, and other great chiefs had sat long before me and looked outside to find themselves. I sat there all alone for 4 days and 4 nights, and I said my prayers and sang my songs and asked the elders to guide me to a peaceful place. For a time, my spirit flew with those eagles, but when they went to nest, it came home to me. When I came down from the mountain, only I knew what I'd left behind. I know who I am. I know what I've done. I know who I did it for. I don't pretend to be anything but what I am. I'm a soldier. I'm a warrior. I am an American fighting man. For the last half-century, wherever American soldiers were fighting an enemy, some piece of me was there. If I wasn't there myself, someone I'd fought alongside or trained to kill silently or taught to survive was there. It didn't matter if it was a jungle, a forest, a field, or a desert. If Americans were on the ground, some part of me was there. I've got plenty of wounds to prove it, although sometimes I think the deepest ones are those you can't see. My reputation is pretty direct. At Fort Bragg, it has always been possible to find experts in almost every kind of warfare, shooting any type of weapon, all the martial arts, surviving on the land. There is always someone there who can teach the best way to do it. When my name was mentioned there, people would respond, "If you want to know about combat, go see O'Neal. He'll teach you how to kill." Every man is born with the skills of a warrior, but it is the circumstances of his life that put him on that path. When you have to fight to survive, you fight, and if you do survive, then you remember those lessons. The fighting makes you a different person, a harder, tougher person. Then you continue the journey by training your heart, your mind, your body, and your soul to be better prepared for the next time. The next time always comes. Fighting fills my soul. I've spent my life walking the path of the warrior. I've got 9 bullet holes in me, and I've been left for dead twice. I've been cut and stabbed more times than I can count. I have served my country, and I killed the enemies of my country. I killed a lot of them, more than I ever counted. That was my job. It was what I was trained to do, and so I did it to the very best of my ability. I did whatever I needed to do to survive. I didn't think about it. I didn't worry about it. I just did it. I used whatever weapon I could find. I killed the enemy from a great distance, and I looked him right in the face from a few inches away, and I killed him. I got damn good at it. The O'Neals settled in Maryland in the 1700s, and since then an ancestor of mine has served in every war in our history. My direct ancestor, Nathaniel Thurber, was a guerrilla fighter in the Massachusetts line in the Revolutionary War. My 5th great-grandfather, John O'Neal, signed the Oath of Allegiance and served with the Maryland militia during the Revolution alongside his son, Peter O'Neal. My 4th great-granduncle, Solomon Sparks, was a member of Captain John Boyd's Ranging Company from Pennsylvania and was named captain of a company of Pennsylvania riflemen during the War of 1812. My great-great-granduncle, Emmanuel O'Neal, was with General Sheridan during the Shenandoah Valley Campaign in the Civil War and is believed to have been present for Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. 3 weeks after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, my grandparents signed the papers that let my father, Chester David O'Neal, enlist in the Army, even though he was a minor. He fought with the 88th Infantry Division, the Blue Devils, for the whole Italian campaign. He won a Bronze Star with service stars during his nearly 4 years in the Army. Sometimes he talked about it, but whatever happened to him, he carried with him for the rest of his life. After the war, he came home to South Dakota and met a young Sioux woman. That was my mother. The Sioux were a nation of fighting men. I'm sure there was blood spilled for the Indian nation on that side of my heritage. I never knew my mother. Never knew one thing about her. By the time I was old enough to remember, she was gone. I never knew her name, never even saw a picture of her. There's a name on my birth certificate, but no other record anywhere of a woman with that name having lived. In fact, until I was about 10 years old, I believed my stepmother was my natural mother. That all changed when I caught my stepmother in a car with another man, a friend of my father's. I warned her that if it ever happened again, I would tell my father, so she set out to poison his mind against me. It got real rough between my dad and me. By the time I told him the truth, he had me down as a liar and a troublemaker. The man knocked me around and then threw me out of the house. That was easier for him than knowing the truth about his wife. I was 12 years old. I went to stay at the home of one of my few friends. His mother was a beautiful, kind lady who was hurting for me. She sat me down and told me that everybody in the town knew what happened, and that I was welcome to stay in their house as long as I wanted. It was all beyond my understanding. I asked her why my mother hated me so bad. Then she told me, "Gary, she's not your mother. She's your stepmother. Your mother is not here anymore. You need to talk with your dad about that." I guess on some level I had always known that, but I was relieved to hear it. What I couldn't understand was why nobody had told me that before. I never found out what happened between my mother and my father, even after he divorced my stepmother and we healed that wound between us. He never would talk about it. He carried all those answers with him into the ground. The most he would ever tell me was that I had native blood in me and I came from the Pine Ridge area in South Dakota. I didn't need him to tell me that. I could feel it in me when the wind blew. I could sense the presence of danger. I could always move swiftly and silently, and it was easy for me to make friends with the spirits. I came up hard. I lived for a time with my dad and my stepmother in Pretty Prairie, which is outside Nickerson, Kansas. Farm country. Mostly I got passed around to relatives in Colorado, Nebraska, Utah, and South Dakota. Supposedly they were all my uncles, but who knows? I didn't stay with any of them too long. Maybe because I moved a lot, I never made serious friends. I definitely was an outcast. Seemed like I was always having problems in school and getting into fights. A lot of the white kids didn't like me because I was Indian, and the Indians didn't like me because I was white. If somebody said something derogatory to me, I'd hit him. I didn't care where I was. In the classroom, on the playground, in the hallway, I hit him. I had no tolerance for those remarks. I didn't win a lot of those fights, but I never quit trying. I'd get knocked down, but I'd get right up again and go at it. Nobody could keep me down. Sometimes people would just quit because they got tired of hitting me. They could beat me, but they couldn't hurt me. I already was filled up with pain. I would never give them that satisfaction. I was never afraid of getting hurt, never afraid of pain. There was nothing I wouldn't do, especially if somebody told me it couldn't be done. For me, that was a direct challenge. So I was always doing things like jumping out of the barn onto a horse or riding the bucking bull out of the barn. I would jump my bike off a ridge, dive off the bridge, climb a sheer cliff. I would never admit there was something I couldn't do. I broke both my arms once by trying to do a 360 on a swing set. When I went over the top, it flung me straight out, and I flew with my arms outstretched like Superman. When I landed, I broke 'em both, and then I went through the rest of the school day without complaining. I stayed the longest with my grandparents on their ranch in western Kansas, mostly because they let me be. It was a big operation, probably 16,000 acres, and they farmed wheat and maize and raised cattle and horses. I loved it there. That was the only place in my life where I wasn't confined by other people's boundaries. I was on my own, mostly with the animals, and I got along with animals far better than with people. Most animals weren't afraid of me. I could approach them, even wild animals, without difficulty. I could ride horses no one else could ride, and when I walked into the barn, the cows would follow me. Whatever it was about me they sensed, it made them feel safe. I searched to find my roots. I was drawn to the Native American reservation, trying with no success to find any information about my mother. As a result, I embraced the Indian traditions. They seemed to make sense to me. Once I went up to Sturgis, South Dakota, where they had a vision quest going on. You needed to be invited to participate. It's an honor, and I hadn't earned it. I was just a spectator. I sat and watched the ceremonies, and even then I envied the people chosen to go up the mountain. I was sitting with several other people around a campfire drinking tea when an elder came up to me and handed me a feather from an immature golden eagle. "Carry it with you," he told me. "Where you are going, you will need this." That was all he said. It made no sense. He didn't know me at all. But it seemed like he had seen a vision, or my aura, and knew that I would need this. To receive an eagle feather from an elder was a great honor, one that I knew I hadn't done anything to earn. It meant that he respected me as a warrior. From that day I carried that feather with me everywhere that I went. I wrapped it in a red cloth and kept it in my whole baggage, which is what I called the little kit I kept with me. Between my dad and my grandfather, I learned the skills that would make the difference in my life. By the time I was 6 years old, I could survive in the woods. I knew how to hunt and fish, make a fire and cook what I caught, and build a shelter. My father was a genius with his hands. He could make or repair just about anything. He could fabricate or repair machine parts. He actually built his own tractors. I used to sit and watch him for hours, beating on the anvil, patiently shaping white-hot steel to fit his needs. He taught me the practical things a man should know: how to drive a car or a tractor, how to weld, how to build a motor or fix an engine. I bought my own first car, a '47 Pontiac, off a junkyard for $10 when I was 10 years old and fixed it up by myself. It was a Flathead 6, and I painted it red right out of a paint can. I wanted people to know I was coming. By the time I was 12, I could barely see over the steering wheel, but I was driving my grandparents to church on Sunday, and a couple of years later, I was racing stripped-down hot rods on a quarter-mile dirt track. It was my grandfather who taught me respect for the land and all living things on it. He taught me how to live off the land. He taught me how to plant and harvest, how to track, trap, and hunt food animals. He taught me how to be in the woods without fear, and to recognize the signs, and how to move without leaving my mark. He taught me that there was more around me than I could see with my eyes, and that my most valuable tool was my mind. Later in the jungles of my life, I would use all of this to track my enemy, find him, and kill him. I grew up comfortable with guns and knives. My dad kept all types of weapons in the house. He had a Thompson machine gun he'd carried with him in the war and brought home. He had a German Luger. He had Japanese swords and British knives. I can't remember a time when I wasn't comfortable carrying a weapon. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I would take my grandfather's .22 long rifle and go out hunting. As I got older, I got myself a 12-gauge. I'd spend hours in the woods by myself, but as I was taught by both my grandfather and my father, I never killed anything I wasn't going to eat. That was a rule we lived by. When I killed an animal or a fish, I always said my little prayer thanking them for helping me survive and wishing them a good journey. It was from my mother that I got my spiritual side. It was always in me. I had a place where I would go when I was troubled or needed my peace. At the south end of the ranch there was a big cottonwood tree surrounded by willows, and I would ride my pony down there. It was my place, a secret place no one else ever visited. When I felt the need, I would go down there and gather willow saplings and build a fire and sit back and look into it. The native peoples call this a vision quest, although I did not know that at the time. Later we would describe it as Ranger TV. As I looked into that fire, I could let my imagination loose and go anywhere in the universe. I would spend days hidden in the willows, staring into the fire and opening my mind. Eventually I would be visited by all the elders. A lot of kids struggle to have imaginary friends, but this was more than that. These people were my teachers. They would teach me about fire, about weapons and animals. They taught me about nature. I never questioned any of it. I accepted it and I absorbed it. It would be a long time before I understood that these were the spirit guides that were giving me access to my subconscious being, teaching me how to use all of my senses, all of my mental capabilities. I didn't realize this type of intense experience wasn't that common. It was real to me, and I just assumed everyone else would understand it. When I told my stepmother about these elders, though, she thought I was crazy and wanted to take me to a child psychologist. My grandmother accepted it as the product of my imagination. "Tell me about it," she said. "Tell your grandfather about it. But don't tell anybody else. They won't understand, and it'll just make everything worse for you." When I looked into the fire, I had visions. I saw things. Mostly it was combat. It was battles from the past. And while I couldn't know it then, battles I would fight in the future. Not so many years later, these visions would save my life more than once. I didn't see the details. It wasn't on that type of conscious level. Instead, it would be the sense of the moment. I would be in a situation, and I would know what I was going to find. I would stare at a map and see the enemy. I would come to a clearing and know what was on the other side. I didn't have to think about it on any conscious level. The knowledge was already there. The only thing I had to learn was to accept it. I was wandering. After that fight with my father, I had no destination in life. I didn't seem to have any purpose. I was just moving through the days, dealing with whatever happened today without any thought about tomorrow. I stopped going to school, and it seemed like nobody even noticed. I didn't really care much about anything or anybody. If people got in my way, I pushed them out of my way. I wasn't ever a mean person. I never intended to hurt people, but there's no question I could have gone that way. I didn't know it, but I was ready to be molded. It was a question of what came along first. When I was 15, I'd gone to stay at my older cousin Butch's house in Kansas. The only thing it had to offer was that it wasn't my house. I just wanted to be gone from anywhere near my stepmother. One day, I saw that Butch had left all his identity papers lying around, including his birth certificate. I picked it all up and left. I had no plan to use it, but it was there, and I took it. It wasn't too much later that I first began thinking about enlisting. We were a patriotic family even before I understood what that meant. The people from my part of the world had always believed in doing their duty. At that time, this country was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and even with the draft, the Army was desperate for volunteers. It seemed like a good place to have an adventure. All I knew about the Army was what I'd seen in John Wayne movies and the little my father told me. I knew we were fighting in Vietnam. I'd seen it on the new TV we'd gotten. But Vietnam, wherever that was, seemed awfully far away from western Kansas. I never really thought about the possibility of getting hurt or killed. I knew that wasn't going to happen to me. Legally, I was still too young to enlist, but Butch O'Neal wasn't. I decided to go up and talk to the recruiter. I was waiting in the lobby to go upstairs when the elevator doors opened, and standing right in front of me was about the most impressive sight I had ever seen. It was a large man wearing an absolutely perfect-fitting tan army dress uniform, several rows of medals laid out neatly on his chest, spit-shined jump boots laced up to his calves, and he was holding a green beret in his hands. I looked at him in awe, in absolute awe, and asked, "What army are you in?" The answer didn't matter to me. Whatever army it was, that's the one I wanted to be in. He told me, "I'm in the Special Forces." I didn't even know what that meant, but I said to him, "I want to be like you." This turned out to be the recruiter. Everything about him was absolutely
Sample complete. Ready to continue?